Mr. Mott told Picard the Federation shouldn't have colonized so close to the Cardassians. Riker agrees with Mr. Mott 100%, and truth is in the eye of the beholder. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5, Episode 3, Ensign Row. Story by, here's a fun one, Rick Berman and Michael Piller, teleplay by Michael Piller, directed by Sirach's buddy Les Landau. This was October 5th, 1991. Where were you? And how are you today, Sirach?
I'm great. I'm doing great.
How
about you?
Good. Doing just
fine.
I've
been better. Obviously we're going through a lot of stuff in the city, but
we're hotboxing smoke and we're all paranoid and panicked and our friends are losing their homes, but we're reviewing an episode. So there's that.
Well,
it kind of feels weird.
And what I mean is, thankfully I'm not affected as much as other people. That's why I'm able, through God's grace, to say that I'm doing great right now, because compared to other people who are suffering, it's a really sad situation, and my heart really goes out to all of those people. And we all have friends and family and loved ones that are either directly or indirectly affected by this.
And it really is just the luck of the draw. We look at these things and we go, that could be me, that could be anyone, that could be my house, that could be my entire neighborhood, that could be anybody, and it's just the luck of the draw. So we have to support the people when it happens to them. Boy, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And on that note, everybody, please, I don't know how to segue that. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon for notifications. If you're listening in, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We'd really appreciate that. And go to patreon.com/The Seventh Rule if you'd like to support the show. Or more importantly, go to the Hollywood Food Coalition, where John Billingsley and his pals do great and amazing work feeding the homeless, which right now, that number has surely skyrocketed.
Yeah. And, this episode in itself kind of really deals with a lot of tragedy. It really comes from a dark place. And it's one of I can see this almost being the episode that is, the backdrop for Deep Space Nine. Just feels like.
See, everybody, Sirach knows. I was going to say something, but I was like, let me leave it alone and see what Sirach puts together on this. Man, that's exactly what it is. I mean, and what the reason Rick Berman and Michael Piller was interesting to me was because that's who created Deep Space Nine. So I wondered when I saw that, did they already have Deep Space Nine as an idea when they wrote, when they said, let's drop the seed here, let's start it here? Because those are the people that, the following year, Deep Space Nine was happening. So this was already, Deep Space Nine was probably in the works during season 5 here. So I really wonder if that's kind of not just the genesis of the idea, but I wonder if the genesis of the idea had already happened and they created this episode as like planting the first seed.
I have to say it has to be. It's almost inseparable from when you talk about the backstory line of the Cardassians, the Federation occupation, all of these things. They're essentially giving you what is the fundamental baseline story of the backdrop of Deep Space Nine. So I don't think it's possible for them not to have been already in discussions about Deep Space Nine. It was already at least an idea being floated around, in my opinion. And they might possibly wanted to have Rolaren be the major Kira of that show. I don't know what their plans were or not, because it looked as if they were trying to spin her off onto Deep Space Nine, and it would have been totally believable.
That's exactly it. Deep Space Nine was going to feature Major Rowe. That was going to be her. But I don't know what happened, whether she wasn't available or she wasn't interested or whatever happened. And that's why they created the Major Kira character, but it was originally going to be Ro Laren in that Major Kira role, just kind of like how Miles O'Brien went over and Keiko, and eventually Worf went over. But that's what's really interesting about that, is that Ensign Ro here was the original Major Kira, and that's where her character was based, and that's who it was going to be. That was the plan. I don't remember why that didn't happen, but also this was the introduction of the Bajorans. This was the first time we see the Bajorans at all in any show, and also, even more importantly, the first time we ever are introduced to Mr. Mott the Barber.
So. I don't know about that being as important, but it certainly it was noticeable. Mott can't stop talking. So, I guess that was some things don't change, right? When you're at the barbershop, you're going to hear a lot of the gossip. So that doesn't even change 500 years from into the future. But
well, you'll see later. You'll see in later episodes, he actually gets, he shows up again. His favorite basketball player, obviously, is K-Mott.
God, I was waiting for a dumb Mott joke, and I got one. So I'm happy.
That's a Kenyon Martin joke, everybody at home.
Yeah.
By Kmart. Anyway, please continue, Sirach.
Yeah, that was Mott funny. But anyways, we got Admiral Kennelly in this episode, right? Who, from the beginning, something felt off with me. Mm-hmm. I just didn't trust that guy. I got a little instinct for some things. And I'll tell you, the moment that it happened for me is in the beginning scene when he was like, I need you to go and talk to the rebels. And Picard says, well, what are we going to offer them? And he says,
amnesty.
And
Picard laughs. He's like, come on, bro.
He's like, Admiral. It was very great, by the way, performance-wise on Picard's part, I thought. Yes. I really liked his delivery there.
I thought the same thing, because I don't think that's on the script. I feel like that was a choice, because on the script, it probably just says amnesty. And maybe the writer may have imagined Picard going, Admiral? Like how Riker does, sir? They always do, sir? Or Data says, sir, an inquisitive sir. But he went, Admiral. Like, what?
Yeah. Come on.
It's me.
Yeah. You don't have to sell me on the BS. Give me the real stuff. Like, what am I going to offer these people, right? And so I thought that was really playful on Picard's part, the way he delivered that line. But what gave me the distrust on Admiral Kennelly was the laugh that he gave right after that.
Yeah.
It was like, I try to pull a fast one on you. Mm-hmm. That's what bothered me. Because why would you be trying to pull a fast one on me? We're seriously trying to negotiate. We're trying to de-escalate the situation, and you're giving me some BS, knowing that it doesn't fly. That's why that laugh right there let me know that he's a BS artist who is trying to sell him on, sell him on an idea that he knows is not sellable. That was the problem for me, and that was the tell that I didn't trust him from the beginning.
Right. And that was great. And who knows if that was there again, or if it was in response to the way Picard said it. But that was the thing that Picard said, Admiral, and the Admiral's response, I thought the same thing. I was like, that's such a perfect thing. It tells an entire story in like a few words. And it was perfect. It was brilliant.
Speaking of brilliant too, also Michael Piller, his teleplay in this. I mean, the story was great, but the language, the way it was written, was clever to me. This felt like a chess game. This was almost you didn't know who to trust moment. At first, I was distrustful of Ensign Ro. Right, I thought she was walking them into a setup, and she was, but she changed her mind about it. And I mean, it was just very well written, because it was a game of gamesmanship. It was a game of maneuvering. It was a chess game between the Cardassians and the Federation, and also this Admiral. It was a way to expose who was telling the truth. So the construction of this episode, the language and the construction was excellent to me.
And we got our pilot of the week, who was Ensign Rowe. Because remember, every week we have a new pilot now. So that was nice. When I saw her there, I was like, oh, good, we've got another pilot of the week. But at least this one has lines. That's cool and that's interesting. So this episode it's really big because it gives us these common themes that have happened throughout the dawn of time. And, I thought of you when I'm watching this, and I'm thinking Sirach's going to recognize these stories of, people that have been displaced. They've been chased out of their home. Then they're scattered all over the world. Then they fight back. There's all these things. Like we've heard this story before, a few times at least. And it really, we recognize it, right? I mean, we understand what the situation is. And sorry, I was just looking at the background here. I'm like, that is so Griffith Park. But anyway, what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was the meat of the episode, and that's where story-wise, I think Rick Berman and Michael Piller hinged the story on a long time story of suffering that we hear by different people, different ethnicities, and racial groups throughout the ages. And I think certain lines resonated with me when I heard Picard say, for example, in reference to Admiral Kennedy saying that we would offer them amnesty and we would offer them a negotiation and with the Cardassians, but it would be behind closed doors and secret. And when his response was, Picard said, they've endured centuries of generations of sympathy and promises.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be applied to a lot of different scenarios when you talk about oppressed peoples throughout history.
Yep.
And so those words resonated with me because Picard, being this kind of voice of reason, was saying that's not good enough. Promises and sympathy, that doesn't help people get out of these situations. Mm-hmm. They've been offered those kinds of tokens that have not proved or resulted in any kind of substantial change in their lives. Meanwhile, they still remain oppressed. And so I thought that was a very valid statement that was wonderfully written and delivered in this episode.
Yeah. So this episode again is just chock full of these kinds of things where we recognize this. We recognize these lines. We recognize these scenarios. We recognize the situations they find themselves in, and it's really a deep episode. And that's what's great about Star Trek is they can basically plop their characters into a situation that we recognize. Maybe we're not proud of something in our history and we go, oh, this is just like such and such or so and so, or this is just like that thing half a world away, but we definitely recognize it. And, sometimes they tiptoe around it. Sometimes they hit it head on. Ira is much more of a hit it head on kind of guy. Ira Stephen Bear on Deep Space Nine. I think this one, Next Generation, is a little bit more, I don't want to say nuanced, but, they address situations, but they don't beat them to death. Like in this case, it's just recognize it. We understand it. We feel for Ro. We feel for the characters, the Bajorans, and they kept calling them the Bajora too, by the way. That was weird.
Yeah.
It's like, how much longer are they going to call them the Bajora? Because they certainly don't in Deep Space Nine, do they?
No, they don't. No. But
yeah, they dropped
I
that.
noticed that too. I noticed that too a few times. Worf said the Bajora. But yeah, they went controversial in this episode. They went deep on it. In this particular episode, you see that once again Picard's diplomacy and tactics, the way his strategy is as a captain, differs than other people. He really uses a lot of diplomacy, a lot of moments in where he uses tries to convince somebody or reveals somebody's intention through conversation. So a lot of what his effectiveness is through this diplomacy, this conversation that he does, and I thought it was well played out in this episode. But I couldn't help but think of, like, we just recently went through October 7th, and we saw that kind of attack in Israel, and um, I think one of the main things that made me think of that was when they went to meet Orta, and he mentioned his face was mutilated, his voice was computerized because his vocal cords were slashed, and so they asked him. I think Orta made a comment like, "Oh, all of this response based on one attack. We should have done it. Should have done it sooner." Something to that effect. Like, we got the Federation's attention, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, just when you hear those kinds of words, you're thinking, "Wow, this is accurate gamesmanship slash diplomacy slash, you know, rebellions, splinter groups." They mentioned, military Bajoran splinter group, and this is exactly how things play out on the world stage. We see this exact thing play out. We see some people become so uh, militarized by whatever their circumstances are and want to lash out and create these kind of terrorist acts. We see some people that are not as um, involved in that way, and they play more of a nurturing to a community type of role. So not everybody has the same reaction when they're under these kinds of occupations, but there are groups in which you will find, like the Maquis, where people assemble and decide that they're going to take matters into their own hand, and that's just the reality of the way the world works. And we see that playing out in other countries around the world right now. It's playing out in Syria, for example.
Right.
You know, and so yeah, this is what happens. I think that Michael Piller and Rick Berman went deep into this particular subject matter. I think with the mindset of, I'm guessing Israel Palestine was the backdrop for the Bajoran Cardassian kind of you know relationship. I'm not sure, but I've read different kinds of work that made that kind of comparison and cited certain interviews that Michael Piller and Rick Berman gave that highlighted that fact.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the things we covered in our text, A Different Trek, when we did the course on Afrofuturism. So, it has been, the correlation has been made, not just by me, but by the people who made it.
Of course. Yeah, I don't really know where the quote is, but they definitely do talk about it. How they say, look, this, we draw inspiration from real world things. And they mention, like, the Jews, like the Palestinians. I think they also mentioned the Kurds, things like that, but
Yes.
This kind of stuff happens. It's not hard to come up with to come up with an example in our world, unfortunately. But you touched on the Maquis, which is really interesting because this does feel like the initial seeds of the Maquis too, right?
Yeah, especially when you have another Starfleet officer that is been co-opted by this other entity. Basically, their allegiance is not to Starfleet, but to something else. To some other goal or some other organization. And Admiral Kennedy, in this particular instance, his allegiance was to a particular outcome designated by his conversations with other people that were involved outside of the Federation. So I think I think this is good. Yeah, this is the basis of the Maquis. This is the basis of the whole Cardassian occupation storyline, the
Yep.
whole Bajoran, freedom fighter storyline. All of that stuff you can see having strong roots in this episode. And I thought, by the way, the woman that played Ensign Rowe did a fantastic job.
Michelle Forbes, she's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, that's Michelle Forbes. Yeah, so she's beautiful, but very forceful. Very, she was strong, tough, very straightforward. She came on with attitude, even when she beamed in to the scene. The first person I've seen beam in with their hand on their head.
Yeah, like, I noticed that too. I was like, was that a joke? Did she show up? I mean, but it definitely reminds you of
beam.
when Major Kira first shows up on Deep Space Nine. Yes. She comes in tough, angry, no nonsense, doesn't want to be there.
Yeah, she came with the whole attitude right there right from the jump, and of course Riker jumps all over that, like, not on my ship, no.
I love that so much. I love how Riker has it out for her. Like, he is like, Picard might have a soft spot for you, but I do not. He's coming in hot. I mean, but he was coming hard on her.
He came at her hard, I would say. He said, what did he say? He said, according, we will respect Starfleet uniform code. Like, he just jumped on her, right? And I'm glad that they addressed that later on in the episode, because I think that was a big thing. I think that was a big moment that Riker was a little bit too tough on her in that particular moment. I thought, I thought he came down on her very hard for that particular moment, based on the fact that she's wearing a cultural thing. It's a religious thing. It's, you would think that Starfleet had some level of acceptance for that when you deal with a multi cultural integrated place like the Federation, where you have species and cultures from all over the universe, right? So you would think that some things would go beyond protocol, and the interesting thing what that reminded me of was there was a time when certain black hairstyles were not allowed because of those same kinds of reasons, like, that's not protocol, so we don't accept your hair to be worn in these kinds of ways. So there were certain hairstyles that were not allowed. There's a lot of things that are not allowed, but you would think that in the future, when you're dealing with integrating so many different cultures, that they would have some level of leniency there.
Yeah, so we've got a lot more on this. Unfortunately, we have a break to jump onto, but man, there is way more to talk about. I was just looking at some quotes from Mr. Pillar, and it was the Kurds was the other one. I was trying to remember. I was like, there are a couple obvious ones. He mentioned the Jewish people, the PLO, and the Kurds were the three examples he gave. But anyway, we're going to take a quick break, everybody. We will be right back with a lot more of this on The Seventh Rule.